Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Madeline and this is Novel Inc. And today we are here to do my December wrap up. I ended up having a pretty great reading month in December despite all of the holiday stress and travel and just general busyness of the holiday season. I had a great reading month and I managed to read 17 things, quite a few novels, quite a few graphic novels, and let's just go ahead and dive into it because I'm sure this is going to be a long one. I'm going to be talking about all the books I read last month in order of star rating because I had some real duds in December and I also had some real winners. So I'm gonna start by talking about my 2-star books in December. The first of those was actually quite a disappointment because it was one of my most anticipated releases of 2019. It comes out this month at the end of January, and that was Dead Queens Club by Hannah Capin. This is pitched as Mean Girls meets The Tudors. It's basically a retelling of Henry VIII and his 6 wives, but set in a modern US high school setting, which is such a fun premise, and it's such a perfect setting for this extra melodramatic part of history, but the execution was really not good in this one. My main issue with this, I almost DNF'd this at least 4 separate times, and I powered through hoping maybe it would get better, and it just didn't. My main issue was that this is a debut novel and the writing style just feels like it's trying way too hard. It just is so forced and forcibly quirky, and it really did not work for me. Some of the retelling elements were cleverly done, but overall I just really could not gel with this writing at all, and just thinking about it is enraging me. I'll be really curious to hear other reviews of this one because I really ended up hating it. It was definitely one of my worst books that I read in 2018, so starting off strong. The next book I read in December was One Day in December by Josie Silver. This is just the dust jacket because I dislike this book so much that I was reading it, without the dust jacket, and I was reading it when I went home to visit my parents, and I just left the book there without the dust jacket on it, and I was like, you can take this to Goodwill because I will not be rereading this ever. A lot of people have really enjoyed this. For me, it was just not a fun time. What to say about this? This didn't really give me the cozy holiday romance vibes that I was hoping. It was a little bit angsty. There was a cheating element to the plot that I really was not a fan of. Basically, if you don't know the premise of this book, it is about 2 strangers who see each other from the window of a bus one day, and they lock eyes and they kind of have a love at first sight sort of moment, and kind of lose track of each other. But then a couple years later, the mystery guy turns up but is dating our protagonist's best friend. So it's a very contrived plot, and it just, like I say, I was not a big fan of this. In addition to just the romance itself not feeling very romantic to me, one major issue I had with this that I haven't heard anyone talking about is the character's relationship with alcohol in this book. There is truly not a scene where we don't get an in-depth description of what alcoholic beverages the characters are drinking. And we see these characters throughout the novel use alcohol to escape their problems over and over again. And I just think that kind of portrayal is really irresponsible if you're not going to comment on it. And I know British culture is very different about drinking than American culture, but to me, like I say, it felt really irresponsible to show the characters relying so heavily on alcohol as a coping mechanism for everything going wrong in their lives. And like I say, you get just so many in-depth descriptions of what the characters are drinking. There is not a social interaction where alcohol is not described in detail. And that was a big glaring red flag for me about this. And I'm a person who drinks. I drink a couple times a week, that's no secret. But I just don't think a portrayal like this of drinking is very good. Yeah, so that was an issue I had with this. Again, didn't feel super romantic, and I thought that the resolution, the 2 characters finding their way back to each other, was just so quick, and it happens at the very end of the novel, so we don't really get any time with the two of them actually being together, which was a little disappointing to me. So overall, was not a big fan of this. Plenty of people are, but for me, this was a solid 2.5 star book. Next, moving on to my 3-star books from December. The first of those was Snow in Love, which is a holiday short story collection that everyone else also read last month. It includes stories from Casey West, Amy Friedman, Melissa De La Cruz, and Nick Stone. I have the exact same thoughts on Snow in Love as every single other person that I've heard talk about this who has read it, and that's that I adored Casey West's story, I adored Nick Stone's story, and the two in the middle, Amy Friedman's and Melissa De La Cruz's, were just pretty terrible. So that seems to be the general consensus all around, and I am with the majority on my opinions on this one. Nick Stone's story, oh my gosh, my heart. It was set in the Atlanta airport and it was a female-female romance and it was just the cutest. So I would recommend picking this up next holiday season, maybe for just Casey West and Nick Stone's story, but the two middle stories really just didn't do it for me, making this a solid 3-star read. The next thing I read was another one of my big disappointments from December, and that was Famous in a Small Town by Emma Mills. I read an arc last month, but this book comes out mid-January, I believe, and I adore Emma Mills. I've read all of her previous books, and they've all been either 4, 4.5, or 5 stars for me, but this one, I had some issues. I buddy read this with my friend Jane from It's Jane Lindsay, and we both had pretty similar feelings on it. I was really all in on this the first, I would say 100 pages, but after that point, it just started to feel like none of the elements of the plot were coming together. So like all of the separate elements of a great book were there for me with this, but it just, like I say, it never really came together. And there was like a plot twist thrown in about 3/4 of the way through the book that I thought was really cheap and really unnecessary. It felt so out of the blue. I also thought that there's this whole storyline of this country singer named Megan Pleasant, who's from this small town that the main character is from, and the main character is trying to get her to come back to play a concert so that she can raise money for her school's marching band to go on this big trip to play at the Rose Bowl. And the whole Megan Pleasant storyline, I was so intrigued by, and that was one of the things that most excited me about reading this book. And it seemed like Emma Mills forgot about that plotline until the very end and had to kind of hastily make a really quick resolution for it. I just thought that, like I say, it felt a little bit rushed, and all of the disparate elements of a good book were there. All of the things that make a good book for me were there. The friendships were great, the romance was pretty cute, but none of it came together to make a cohesive whole, which is where this let me down. Next, I have quite a few 4-star books to talk to you guys about this month. The first is Queen of Air and Darkness by Cassandra Clare. You guys probably have already seen my reading vlog for this. I read this in like 48 hours. It was a wild time. I really enjoyed this. However, it is probably my least favorite Shadowhunters conclusion so far. I had a very like emotional reading experience reading this book because I just love the dark artifices and I love what Cassie Clare has done and the things that she's explored through this series, but some of the elements of the plot just really didn't come together for me. I'm not gonna say any spoilers here because you can go check out my reading vlog for that, but I will say the Thule plotline, I couldn't stand it. It was by far my least favorite part of the book. I was so bored. It lasted for over 100 pages and I found it really tiring. I also thought that the way the whole Parabatai curse situation wrapped up was very underwhelming and very anticlimactic. Certain plot elements I think could have been handled in a more exciting way. This was being billed as a book that would change the Shadowhunter world as we know it, and I just didn't really feel like it took it as far as it could have taken it, if that makes sense. So while I really enjoyed this, like I said, this is still one of my all-time favorite series. I could not in good conscience rate this 5 stars, so it got a 4-star rating from me. Next, I have 2 books by the same author, who is an author I discovered in the month of December, who instantly became a favorite. I discovered a new favorite author in December, and on top of that, she's a nonfiction author. So I totally did not expect that at all, but 2018 just kept surprising me till the very end. And the first book of hers I want to talk about is It Ended Badly. The author is Jennifer Wright. It Ended Badly is a book about 13 of the worst breakups throughout history. I thought this was really fun and really engaging. I listened to this on audio. It's available on Hoopla if your library uses Hoopla, and I just had a great fun time with it. It's like, this is everything I love about nonfiction. And the next book I read by her was Killer Fashion. This is a super short, like 50-page book with illustrations and poems, and it's all about articles of clothing throughout history and garments throughout history that have proved deadly. It was so fun, and again, this was available on Hoopla, and it's a super quick read. It's just like a couple flips on your phone and you're done. But I had such a fun time with this. I will talk more about Jennifer Wright later in this video because, spoiler alert, I have another of her books later on in this wrap up coming up, but I love the way she writes about history. I think that it's very accessible while also remaining really smart. The information doesn't feel like it's being dumbed down or watered down for the reader. I loved it. It was so fun. Love both of these a lot and love Jennifer Wright a lot. Next is an audio listen from last month, and that is The Afterlife of Holly Chase by Cynthia Hand. I read this because it was being pitched as a really nice holiday Christmassy read, and I would have to agree with that. I didn't really expect much going into this book, but this book went in totally different directions than I would have ever anticipated that it would go in. I couldn't really predict anything that was gonna happen. It didn't wrap up the way that I thought it would, but I really enjoyed the ride of this book. I also loved the audio narration. I thought the narrator did a wonderful job. Overall, like, yeah, this is a very heartwarming Christmassy read, and it really just made me happy. And like I say, it was such an unexpected surprise because I didn't really know what to expect going in, but I ended up super enjoying it. Next book I want to talk about is In Other Lands by Sarah Reese Brennan. I received this from my lovely friend Julie at Pages and Pens as a holiday gift, and the reason I read this last month was because this is my friend Jane from It's Jane Lindsay's one of her favorite books. It was her favorite book of 2017, and she had just read my favorite book of 2017, which, if you didn't know, was The Girl with the Red Balloon by Catherine Locke in November. And so when I got this from Julie for Christmas, I was like, okay, I have to read Jane's favorite from last year now. And I'm really glad I did. I ended up super enjoying this. In Other Lands, I don't want to say too much about it because I feel like this is the kind of book that it's really fun to go into blind, but it's in a lot of ways kind of a satirical version of like a Chosen One story and a satirical version of like a whole like magical school story. Basically, In Other Lands is about a teenage boy named Elliot who goes off to attend school in a magical other world called the Borderlands, and it chronicles his life from age 13 to age 17 throughout all of his years of schooling. And it's just a very like realistic take on this whole trope. Like Elliot is like, what do you mean like there's not internet here? What do you mean my iPod explodes when I bring it here? It kind of like, it just approaches the whole like, I live in a magical land now, but I'm from the mortal world in a very like realistic and humorous way. The characters really were what made this for me. We have a golden trio kind of situation with three best friends. It was so fun. We get a beautiful romance, some bi rep. Like I say, I really enjoyed this. My one qualm with it is that while we do get bisexual rep, I don't feel like this is a very nuanced portrayal of bisexuality just because of its kind of black and white depiction of gender. Like, we don't get any mention of genders other than men and women, and I think anytime a book with bi rep does this, it's a disservice to the bi rep. That was my one qualm with it, but overall I still super enjoyed this and I'm really glad I picked it up. It was so fun. Next, I have a couple graphic novels to talk to you about. The first is Aquacorn Cove by Katie O'Neill. This was super cute. This was a Christmas gift from my friend Emma at Emma Tobias. Thank you again, Emma. I had read Princess Ever After by Katie O'Neill earlier on in 2018, and as soon as I got this, I picked it up and read it. It was so fun. Katie O'Neill's writing is just so cute. Her stories are so heartwarming, but they also focus on really important like social issues. There's like an underlying theme of like what we need to do to protect the environment, and that was just, it was just so pure and so lovely, and I really enjoyed this. I also finally picked up Taproot by Kizzy Young this month. It was a romance between a gardener and a ghost. This was actually recommended to me at BookCon this year by my friend Sylvia at Wish Fulfillment. She was carrying around a box of recommendations, and they were all her 4- and 5-star books from Goodreads, and this is the one that I pulled, and she told me she thought I would actually really enjoy it, and surprise surprise, I did. It was a romance between a gardener and a ghost, and it was so freaking cute, and we get some great queer rep, and it was just the best. I loved every second of reading this one. My last 4-star book of December was We Set the Dark on Fire by Taylor K. Mejia. This was an arc. This book comes out in February, and I loved it. It was so great. Basically, we follow our main character Danny, who lives in this world called Medio. Every wealthy man in this country has 2 wives, a primera and a segunda, and these women are trained for these specific roles, like from early on in their upbringing, and they're sent to specific schools to prepare for these particular roles. So our protagonist, Danny, has been trained as a primera and is at the top of her class, her graduating class from her school, and ends up getting chosen into the household of one of the most prominent young men in this society. And the segunda that gets sent to live at the house with her and work with her is a girl that's kind of her nemesis from school. And the story kind of takes off from there. We get like a rebellion story, and we get a beautiful female-female romance. I hate to love female-female romance. It was so great. I think the story was very politically relevant in the current moment. There were also so many influences of Mexican culture on this story and on Medio, and I loved that. I can't wait for this book to be out, like I say, because I think that so many people are gonna read it and love it. And this is book 1 in a duology, and I think book 2 is coming out in 2021, so I'm already waiting with bated breath for book 2. Like I say, this was super strong. I ended up giving it 4 stars. Next, in the month of December, I picked up Nevermore: The Trials of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. Oh my goodness, this was so cute. I got this as a Christmas gift from my friend Heather, who is on Bookstagram at Heatherful Reads. She's delightful, and I'm so glad that the two of us are friends. But I am not typically a middle grade reader. Most of you probably know this, but I had heard so many good things about this series, and I had heard those good things from other people who don't typically enjoy or read middle grade, and I'm so glad that I listened to all of the wonderful rave reviews of this, because I ended up loving this. It is just such a magical, whimsical tale. Totally agree with everyone that it gives you total Harry Potter vibes at certain points. It was just like such a lovely reading experience, and the setting was so whimsical and magical, and I just can't say enough good things about this. I already had the sequel checked out from the library, and I can't wait to get to it. Highly recommend checking the series out if you haven't already. Now we're finally getting into my 5-star reads of December. The first of those is a graphic novel. It's Goldie Vance Volume 1. I got this as a Christmas gift from my friend Laura at Bookies and Cookies. I thought this was so much. Goldie Vance follows a teenage girl named Gold. She works in a hotel, and she's mixed race, and it's set in the 1950s, and she solves mysteries on the side at this hotel. So basically this is just a super diverse version of like Nancy Drew, and it is the most fun. I had a great time reading this first volume, and I cannot wait to continue on with the series. Another 5-star graphic novel that I read in December was The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill. This was also a gift from Laura, and I adored this. Again, Katie O'Neill is one of my favorite graphic novel artists and authors. I think that her stories are just so precious, while also providing a lot of very needed representation, like explicitly on the page. Basically, this is about like dragons who grow little tea leaves off of their horns, and it is just as precious as you would think. There's a really cute female-female romance. This was a delight from start to finish, and again, can't recommend it highly enough. Can't recommend Katie O'Neill highly enough. Next, getting on to my second favorite book of December, that was Death Prefers Blondes by Caleb Rarig. Again, this was an ARC. It comes out at the end of January, and oh my gosh, you need to pre-order it now. It was so good. It is a heist story where all of these heists are being carried out by a ragtag group of drag queens, teenage drag queens. It is so good. And I'm really not one for like super action-y books. I'm much more of a character-driven reader. So while I did appreciate how well written the action scenes were in this book, that wasn't what kept me so invested. What kept me invested was the characters. Our main character in this book is Margot Manning, who is a Hollywood socialite by day. However, by night, she, as her drag persona, Miss Anthropy, heads up this crew of drag queens who perform heists. This is like the kind of portrayal of drag culture that I want to see more of in popular culture. If you didn't know, I like love drag as an art form, and obviously like with that, I love like things like RuPaul's Drag Race, but I don't think that shows like RuPaul's Drag Race or portrayals of queer people like we get on RuPaul's Drag Race are always indicative of the whole story. Like they pretty much only represent a very specific subset of the queer community, and I felt like this was a much more inclusive portrayal of the world of drag. We have characters who are mixed race, we have characters who are black. All of our main characters are queer, including Margot, who, even though she is not a queer man, she is bisexual, and that is very explicitly described on the page. Like I say, the action scenes were really well described, and they kept me on the edge of my seat. I didn't really know where this mystery was going at any given point. It continued to surprise me. The romance was awesome, very sex positive as well, and I can't say enough good things about this. It's a drag queen heist book. Like, you need it, okay? It's so good, you need to read it. And finally, we have made it to my favorite book of December, which was Get Well Soon by Jennifer Wright. This ended up making my favorites of the year list. If you saw my nonfiction favorites video, link in the cards. But as I mentioned earlier in this video, I fell in love with Jennifer Wright this month, and this is the book that made me fall in love with her. I actually was recommended this by one of my IRL friends, Jessie, and I am so glad she recommended it to me and that I trusted her recommendation, because you have some offline friends who trust their book recommendations and others who are like, I'll stick to booktube friends recommendations. But like, Jessie is the person who I really trust with like book recommendations, and she delivered on this one because this ended up, like I say, being one of my favorite books of 2018, shockingly. Get Well Soon is about history's worst plagues and the heroes who fought them. So every chapter is about a different plague from human history and kind of the people who were instrumental in curing it or fighting it. And it was just so good. And I said this in my nonfiction favorites video, but like, this weirdly gave me a lot of hope for humanity, which is weird to say about a book about diseases that killed millions of people, but the way that people like throughout human history have like stepped up and tried to make life better for their fellow humans was really touching and like awe-inspiring. And like I say, Jennifer Wright's telling of history is equal parts accessible and intelligent, which is a very hard balance to find in nonfiction, I feel. Overall, this was just such a hit for me. I loved this. It was witty, it was smart, it was hopeful, and I learned a lot from reading it. If you're looking for kind of a good place to start with nonfiction, I would highly recommend starting with Jennifer Wright's books, because like I say, I think they would be accessible to a very wide range of people, and I just can't seem to stop raving about this book apparently, but you should read it. It was great. That's all. With that, we have finally reached the end of my December wrap up. Thank you for sticking around. I'm sure this was an exorbitantly long video, but I would love to know what you all read during the month of December, and if you found any new favorites at the end of the year that snuck onto your favorites list. As always, all my social media links will be down below so that we can be friends. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you soon in another one. Bye!